welcome to this episode of The Logos, the life of light, love, and logic. This is episode 3. At the beginning was the Logos. And again, I want to thank you for joining us today and also sharing in the first 2 episodes with this production. We also want to just remind you, we'll probably do it for these first 3 episodes, that the Logos is the spoken word or discourse that gives structure and order. And again, the purpose of this program is to shine light on the Logos, who gives structure, order, and meaning for our lives. And this program believes that answers to your deepest existential questions, meaning questions about life and your existence, we believe those answers are found by discovering the Logos, which again is the whole purpose of this program. So let's just do a quick review from episode 2. In episode 2, we talked about truth is that which is real, which exists, which is. So truth exists regardless of what we believe about the truth. We also discussed last time that the intensity of what we believe determines how we think and act. Additionally, our beliefs come from within our soul, from our social and environmental influences, and also from our own personal experiences within the context of life, which is the intersection of our soul interacting with the social and environmental influences in our life. We discussed how our beliefs are challenged or reinforced as we encounter new experiences or new evidence in our lives. We mentioned that evidence is anything that can help us believe or not believe something. So there are different types of evidence. There's empirical evidence, which means it's tangible and I can experience it with my 5 senses, and it can be manipulated, and it can be observed, and it can be measured, and it can hopefully be repeated within the experimental process. So it's empirical. I can see it. I can observe it. There's logical evidence, which means it fits into a pattern or structure. There's faith. Faith can be a form of evidence, which means I believe or trusting something or someone that seems credible. Intuition. We talked about intuition as a form of evidence, which can be a gut instinct or just an inner knowing. There's emotional evidence. Some people believe or not believe things based upon how it makes them feel. Does it make them feel good? Does it make them feel bad? They're more likely to believe things that they find emotionally pleasurable or satisfying. We also talked about how tradition and cultural influences can be a form of evidence. This is the way it's always been done. This is what my culture allows. This is what cultural expectations are. So therefore, that's enough evidence for me to believe something. If the culture says it's appropriate, then I believe it's appropriate. If the culture says it's inappropriate, then I believe it's inappropriate. And that, again, is a form of evidence that for some people allows them to believe or not believe something. And then a final point from the episode 2 is that if the Logos is true, if God is true, our belief or our unbelief will impact the quality of our lives in terms of the sense of purpose and a sense of fulfillment that we have in our lives. So let's move along to this week here in episode 3. And our objectives for this program is we want to describe the Logos, the spoken word which gives order and structure, or God. How is the Logos described at the beginning? And then secondly, what do we mean by the beginning? So we read in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning of what? And so we want to look at that as well today. So we laid the groundwork regarding belief systems. We basically are saying that what we believe or what we don't believe doesn't really change what is true. It just impacts how we respond to the truth. So the Logos was presented as truth by the ancient writers and will be presented as truth in this program. The only thing that differs among us, you, the listener, and the viewer, is do we choose to believe the truth or the Logos or not? It's my hope that whether you believe or don't believe in God, that as we study the Logos, that you will learn not only to believe, but love God as the creator who gives life, order, and purpose. And so now, starting with this program and going forward, we want to present the Logos, the spoken word that gives order and structure. So let's look at some ancient writings that begin to describe the Logos for us. From the Gospel of John, chapter 1, we see that in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. The Logos was with God in the beginning. Through him, the Logos, all things were made that have been made, and without him, nothing was made that has been made. In the Logos was life, and that life was the light of men. The Epistle of John, chapter 1. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked at and our hands have touched, this we proclaim concerning the word of life, or the Logos. This is the message we've heard from him and declare to you. God is light, the Logos is light, and in him is no darkness at all. Let's look at a writing from King Solomon in chapter 8 of his Proverbs. The Lord brought forth wisdom at the beginning of his work, before his deeds of old. Wisdom was brought forth from eternity, from the beginning, before the world began. Let's look at Paul's epistle to the church at Colossae, also known as the Epistle to the Colossians, chapter 1. Christ, the Logos, is the image of the invisible God, note that, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So if we look at just some of those scriptures or writings, let's look at the Logos, who is with God and is God at the beginning. Just as just a little bit of a foundation, again, the Logos is the spoken word which gives order and structure. Logos is a Greek word which is derived from the Greek root word legwo, which actually means to lay forth or lay out. So we all do that. We all plan things, right? We all take the time to plan and give a sense of order. Well, the Logos, or sometimes it's also referred to as logos, can be pronounced logos. So sometimes you'll hear me interchange those logos. The Logos is to actually speak. So legwo is to, in our mind, in our imagination, to prepare or plan things, to lay it out, to describe it. But then Logos is to actually speak it, to describe it. So we speak all kinds of words. Sometimes we just greet people. Sometimes we ask how people are doing. Sometimes we may just declare something. But Logos is to actually lay forth and to delineate and to describe something. So I can go up to you and say, hey, can I have a hamburger? That's great. But if I come up to you and say, can I have 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun? Look at the description. I've laid out for you what I want. I don't just say I want a hamburger. I've actually described it. I've laid it out before you. I just spoke. That's known as Logos. I could come up to you and ask you, could you build me a house, please? Which is fine. But think about if I say, I'd like for you to build me a house, and I'd like for it to be 30 feet wide by 52 feet long. I'd like for you to, for the walls, could you have, instead of 2x4 studs, could you have 2x6 studs, because I want thicker walls for thicker insulation? Could I have my bedroom this size and the these spare bedrooms this size? And could I have 3 bathrooms at this dimension? And could I have electrical outlets placed this far apart? And could I have rafters that are, instead of 24-inch on center, can they be 16-inch on center, just have a stronger roof? And as I describe that to you, that's Logos. I am actually laying forth, I'm speaking what my plans are. And that's what we're looking at when we look at Logos. So the Logos is the spoken word which lays things out. It designs and creates. And this is the Logos, who's our creator. I've listed here some things that creators must possess. So God possesses these things, and all creators possess these things, just not in the perfection that God does. So first of all, let's look at this. Life. All creators must exist. There must be life. They must have existence. We can only create if we exist. So once we're dead, in fact, Solomon wrote about this. He said that upon a man's death, all of our plans come to nothing. We can't plan anything. We can't speak anything and design anything and produce anything anymore because we're dead. We're not productive anymore. So all creators possess life, existence. We think and create because we exist. Think about the philosopher and mathematician Rene Descartes. Think about his famous quote, cogito ergo sum. Cogito ergo sum, which essentially is translated as I think, therefore I am. Now, a lot of people have used that quote in many different scenarios, but essentially what Descartes is saying, I know that I exist, I know that I'm real, I know that I'm true because I can think, because I can create. And that's a pretty powerful thought. Because I exist, because I am real, I can think, I can plan, I can lay forth, I can actually produce. So that's an important step. Creators must exist, which logically is the greatest argument for the existence of God. We look at his creation, we look at the perfection of creation, we look at the order of things, and something had to exist in order for this to be created. Let's look at a second quality. There must be light and vision. I like what one of the verses we just read. It said that in him was life, and that life was the light of man. When we live, in order to produce, we must have light and vision. What does light do for us? When we have total light, we have the ability to see and understand in full clarity. When there's light, good light, there's no shadows, there's no secrets, there's no surprises. All things are known. This reveals to us that God he knows all truth, and he's totally complete. There's nothing hidden from his sight. There is no darkness in him. That's why God is perfect light. He sees all things. There are no shadows. There are no secrets. There's no darkness. When you see things clearly, you can perform to the utmost. A third quality of a creator is knowledge. A creator can see clearly, but they also have knowledge. How do I create what I'm going to do? How do I know all the nuances and all the details and all the minute bits of information that I need to put this together? So knowledge is essential. We have to have the ability to plan and organize. We have to have the ability to see the end from the beginning. Now, what I have here is a term called omniscience, which means all knowing, all knowledge. Only God has true omniscience. He sees the end from the beginning. He looks at his piece of art, he looks at his creation, and he knows exactly the very beginning stroke and the finishing touch. He knows exactly how his creation is going to go. So do all other creators. We know that this is what it's going to take to build this, and this is what it's going to take to finish it. This is what it's going to take for it to be functional. So we need that knowledge. Along with knowledge, we also need wisdom. And we saw this a while ago, that wisdom was present at the beginning of creation. Wisdom is the power to make a right or correct and true or authentic judgment about things. This involves omnipotence, which is all power. I think sometimes we've heard it said that knowledge is knowing something, wisdom is being able to implement it. That's a simplistic definition of the term wisdom, but it is basically makes sense. Wisdom is the ability to have information, but then make a correct implementation of that knowledge. So we make correct and true judgment. The results are good and orderly. There's a scripture that actually says wisdom is proved right by her children. You know you made a wise choice when your children turn out well. You know you made a wise decision. You know you made a wise creation when things turn out in working order and work properly. And then I've got a fifth characteristic of a creator, and hopefully this is going to make sense. Creators are invisible to the creation. Another scripture we just looked at a while ago talks about that. God is invisible, and he created visible and invisible things. What do we mean by invisibility? The good creator is revealed by his creation, but he exists beyond his creation, outside of his creation. So therefore, what? The creator is omnipresent, everywhere at once. Okay, and we're going to look at some examples here, and hopefully this is going to make some sense. But I want you to think about that. A good creator is not actually within the creation. The good creator exists outside of the creation. His fingerprint and his character is clearly seen and obvious within his creation, but the creator is not visible. The creator, again, is greater. He's above and beyond the creation. So here's some examples. One of my favorite artists is Winslow Homer, a realism painter of idyllic scenes. Here I've got a couple pictures, and we can look at these, are actually paintings, pictures of paintings, and we see Winslow Homer's knowledge, wisdom, light, and his invisibility. So look at some of the themes and colors. All these belong to, he planned this out. He's got certain themes. He's got certain colors, certain textures. First of all, Winslow Homer exists. Why? Because these paintings exist. We know that. In order for these paintings to have existed, Winslow Homer had to exist. We also see his light. He had a full, clear picture of what he wanted to do when he painted these paintings. We see his knowledge. He knew what tools he had to use, what colors he had to use, and then the wisdom. He did such a good job of mixing colors and putting things at just the right spot that both of these paintings can jump out at us. But let me ask you a question. When you look at both of these paintings, do you see Winslow Homer in these paintings? No, he exists above and beyond these paintings. This is what we see when we look at these paintings. You know, we see the boys playing, we see the boys riding in a boat, but Winslow Homer is nowhere to be seen. But yet Winslow Homer is everywhere to be seen because it's his painting, it's his knowledge, it's his wisdom, it's his touch, it's his fingerprints that are all over this thing. He exists beyond it, much like in our world. In this creation, we see God's fingerprints all over. We see God's colors. We see God's textures. We see God's taste. We see God's desires everywhere around us. Yet we don't see God because he's invisible. He's above and beyond his creation. I'll give you another example. One of my favorite stage plays is Thornton Wilder's Our Town. It's a unique play. The nice thing about it has a wonderful plot, wonderful characters, wonderful story. The nice thing about it is you don't have to have a lot of work putting up the stage because it's a very simplistic stage. It involves essentially a couple of ladders, which represent an upstairs, the second story of two houses, and there's a few chairs. Again, Thornton Wilder existed because he wrote the play. We see that he, again, used light. He knew exactly how he wanted this play to go. He had knowledge of how to write stories, how to develop characters, how he had knowledge of how he wanted to set up the stage. He used wisdom. He put it all together perfectly to create a wonderful play. But again, invisibility. Do you see Thornton Wilder on this stage play? I've seen several versions of the play, and I've never seen Thornton Wilder in it. But his fingerprints are all over it. Why? Because he wrote it. He designed everything. He implemented, he put down the different sound effects that were supposed to be in there, the way the stage was supposed to be set up, the whole plot. His fingerprints are all over it. Even though we don't see him, he's there. Let's give another example. Henry Ford's Model T. Again, this highlights Ford's engineering and design skills. Ford existed. That's why the Model T exists. He saw what he wanted. He had knowledge of how to put this together. And I'll tell you what, I appreciate people who have engineering skills. Somebody who could sit there and know that we have to have wheels and we have to have an engine to move those wheels. And we have to have a suspension system to hold up this automobile because you want something to ride in and you want something to protect you and all the different functions to make this car run. That took a lot of knowledge and, of course, the wisdom to put it together. But again, Ford mass-produced many of these cars, but was he in them? No. In fact, people drive cars all the time, and we very, very seldom ever think about who made this. I mean, everything we do. I mean, the chairs we sit in, the things that we buy, even computers and all these things that kind of, flood our lives. We don't stop and think somebody had to create all this. Somebody took their time and their knowledge and their wisdom to create it, and yet they remain invisible. Somebody created it, even though we don't see them. So in the beginning was the Logos, the God who exists, the God of light, knowledge, wisdom, and invisibility. So in the beginning of what? His creation. God exists apart from his creation, but he began a creation and we're part of the production. And so I love this picture here because it's just a blank, piece of paper, or I guess actually a little board, cardboard, that somebody's getting ready to paint on, and it's blank. But what does the artist do? The artist, because he exists and because he can see very clearly, and he's got all the colors laid out before him, and he's got the different paint brushes and the water to dip his paintbrushes in, and he's going to mix colors. He's getting ready to paint, and he knows exactly how he's going to begin that painting, and he knows exactly when that painting will be finished. So in the beginning was the Logos. Right here, before we were even born, before the very first man walked upon the earth, before the very first mountain was created, before the very first oceans were created, it's blank. But in the beginning was the Logos. In the beginning was God, a God who exists, a God of light, a God of knowledge, a God of wisdom, and a God who remains invisible to his creation. But yet, as he begins to paint, his fingerprints and his love and his very intelligence will be all over this painting. So why did God create this production of which we're a part? Paul enlightens us in Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. The creation was by him and for him. Think about that. God created this earth and cosmos and universe for himself. John confirms in Revelation chapter 4, verse 11, you're worthy, O Lord, to receive glory, honor, and power, for you have created all things. For by your will, and the King James Version actually translates it as, and for your pleasure, they exist and are created. It was God's will. God wanted to do this for his pleasure, for his satisfaction, for his enjoyment. You and I, everything exists because God wanted it to exist. Now, this is going to bring a very important point. The creation is all about God's will and satisfaction and enjoyment. This creation, this painting of which we are part of, this play of which we are a part of, it exists because God chose to create it for his own pleasure and satisfaction. It's not about my will and my pleasure. And I think that's one of the great struggles of life is we can live our 70 or 80 years here on this earth, maybe more, maybe less. And we can think that this whole thing is about us. And we can be on this stage production. And we can think this play is all about who I am. We can think this portrait or this painting is all about me and that I'm the center of attention. But actually, this creation was all about the creator, and it was his will, and it was for his will and his purpose and his glory and his honor that he created this. So the work of all creators may enhance the life of others, but ultimately it's the creator's satisfaction in its creation that's the motivating factor, and the creator should get all the glory and recognition. Again, another painting by Winslow Homer. Winslow Homer didn't have to paint that. He didn't have to paint that. I mean, it's a great scene. Two boys making little model boats there by the seaside. He didn't have to do that. We, as observers, can get enjoyment from that photograph, or I mean, from that painting. But ultimately, Winslow Homer painted because it was his idea. He wanted to share something from within his creative nature. He wanted to share it with the world. But ultimately, again, it was from his satisfaction. He didn't have to do it, but it was satisfying for him to do it. It brought him pleasure. It brought him enjoyment to be able to do that. Henry Ford's Model T. Henry Ford was a bright man, a brilliant man. He didn't have to create that. He created it because obviously we have gained great use from automobiles. It's made our lives simpler. But there was some sense of satisfaction for Henry Ford to create that because it was from within him, from within his abilities and within the knowledge that God gave him, that he was able to create this. And yes, he created it to enhance our lives, but there was also some satisfaction for Henry Ford to create the Model T and other Ford automobiles. And so it is with God. God created this wonderful portrait. God created this wonderful photograph. God created this wonderful play. God created this wonderful movie of which we are a part. And we may enjoy certain facets of it, but ultimately we've got to remember the creator, the one who designed all this. It's for his satisfaction. So in conclusion, the creator, or the Logos, is light, knowledge, wisdom, invisible, and he exists. The creator created this world and universe and cosmos by his will and for his pleasure, for his satisfaction. He should receive the glory and credit and honor for his creation. Do we give God credit? Do we give God glory for his creation? Or are we kind of self-absorbed thinking that this painting is about us or that this play is about us? And then we also talked about in the beginning as a reference to when God set forth order to his creation. And we're part of that today. Well, I hope that there were some things that were shared today that hopefully benefited you, encouraged you, made you think. If you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to send me an email at thelogos.lightlovelogic@gmail.com. Again, that's thelogos.lightlovelogic@gmail.com. Again, thank you for joining us for episode 3, and we'll see you next time.